Well, hopefully it progresses onto an interview and you can get in front of that person properly and start building that relationship. So my key tip here is always think of it as a relationship tactic, right? You are meeting someone to discover whether you're the right fit for them and they're the right fit for you. So treat it like a discovery call. And how a discovery call's delivered, lots of open questions, open-ended questions that allow people to talk, that allow people to story tell, and enables a good flow of conversation. So getting that interview opportunity is like gold. It's like the milestone that you're really reaching, because then your odds are really good for converting that sale, for getting that process over the line. And really in that interview, it's a prime opportunity to discover as much about each other as possible in the process.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because again, I know myself as an interviewer. I've heard this rule where you have two ears and one mouth and you should use them in that proportion. And I can remember being in an interview myself where I felt I hardly said anything and they loved me because what they're talking about is something which interests them a lot, which is themselves. Whereas if you're just sat there and you're just filling the airs and you're talking about yourself, it can be quite boring for the person that hears it. So that connection you speak about of, exploring with their problem, asking them questions, open-ended questions, and getting them to talk. You sometimes feel this urge to just do what I'm doing now, which is just speak endlessly and not let the other person have a go, because I really want to tell you what I'm thinking and how great I am. But actually, you're harming your chances. The more you can get the other person to speak with open-ended questions, the better the chances that you have of connecting with them.
And how many people, Jeremy, ask questions only at the end of an interview?
Yeah, totally.
So many people do that, right? Yeah, they save up all their questions right till the last 5 minutes of the interview, if it even happens, because sometimes
the last
these
1
things
minute.
overrun. Yeah, exactly. So I would, my big tip here is throw your questions in throughout. So
Yeah,
it's a conversation that goes back and forth. Don't
totally.
save it up to the end.
Yeah,
And reach that conversation level. Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah,
open-ended questions. So if they've asked you around what was the most challenging situation in your last role? Okay. It's a competency-based question to understand how you might manage stress, challenges, difficulties, maybe your resilience, problem-solving ability, etc. You answer the question. Maybe you could say, I'm really interested in understanding what was your most challenging situation in the last 6 months for you as a team.
yeah,
Wow. Okay. They then have to give you a little bit of something back, and you get to understand their resilience, their team culture, how they thrive or not in challenging situations. So it gives a bit of the not the power, but it levels the playing field, that it isn't just like you're asking me a ton of
yeah,
questions and I'm in response mode, but also I want to get to know you and your organization and see if I'm a fit.
yeah. It changes it from an interrogation to a conversation.
Mm, mm.
And yeah, I've used that myself. You're in an interview and you can talk about, well, what's the company's objectives? What are you trying to do? You can ask all sorts of questions because it's in the interviewer's head. And when they have the option to sort of talk about that, they get enthused and that connection builds up. So you have found yourself in the situation now where you have created a connection, you've had some conversations, and maybe you've even been through an interview process or you're in the middle of an interview process. How do I bring that to a successful close for me? How do I really solidify that connection so that actually they say, this is the person that we want and we're going to offer them the job?
So I think this is about actually making it feel like it's a close to a process. So feeling that in an interview format that you are coming to the end of a conversation and it's structured and there are next steps outlined and involved. What you want to avoid is a fizzle out,
Hmm.
kind of the energy just feeling like it just fizzles at the end and it doesn't go anywhere. So you could manage this process by saying, I really enjoyed the interview. If you did, let's not lie. Some interview formats aren't great or not great experiences. But if you enjoyed the interview, process, you can reaffirm that.
Just
I
say so,
really,
right? Yeah.
yeah, I really enjoyed this interview process and back it up with why. I loved getting to know your backgrounds. I think the work you're doing is super exciting. I can see myself X, Y, Z. And so in terms of next steps, like what happens from here, where do we go from here? So you want to leave that interview interaction with a really clear, like, this is what happens next.
Right.
It will
And
either be
how do I do that without coming across too pushy? Because again, I've been in situations where someone more or less says to me, "Am I going to get the job?" Yeah, and you're like, "Well, maybe you would have done until you asked me that." So how do I do this without becoming too pushy? Because I guess the interviewer is still in control, and we must allow that to happen.
yeah, yeah. How do you do it without being too pushy? So part of it's going to be around body language and tone. So we can sound pushy just by the tone that we use, and the choice of words. I would really appreciate to have a conversation with you again. Is different to when will I be expecting feedback? Because I haven't had any for the last few interviews, and it's getting discouraging. So that think about your word selection really, really closely. And it's about framing it with lots of optimism. It's that glass half full. Like, I really appreciate the time that you've spent with me today. I'd really love to have another conversation with you. What would be the next step? Would we meet again, or uh, what's the next step in that process, or will this be the last step in that decision process? um yeah, or asking, uh when do you think you'd be able to get back to me with some feedback, because I really, really have enjoyed meeting you today, and I'd love to hear whether you think there's a fit, or any feedback that you might have. If you frame it as feedback, it's not, have I got the
Yeah,
job?
and I like what you're saying, because it's coming back to what you said earlier on, which is you're not saying, "I really need a job. I've had lots of bad interviews and I'm pretty desperate and please help me." You're saying, "I think there's been a good connection. I've enjoyed this conversation. Like, I'm really interested in your next steps."
Mm. The other thing that people do, and it's getting a, is it getting a bit old? Maybe it's getting a bit old, or it's getting a bit clunky how people do it. Is there anything I can tell you or do before we leave today that can,
Great question. Yeah.
make you change your mind? I don't like it that much, because that's a little bit pushy. I love the essence of
Mm,
the question. It's the framing of it.
yeah.
Is there anything I can do? Very direct and a little bit closed in language.
Yeah.
Would it
I've
be
used things like, "Is
helpful?
there anything I've missed? Is there anything we haven't spoken about enough that
Yeah,
you'd like to know
yeah,
more
that's
about?"
good. And you could also do would it be helpful for me to send you an example of my work in this scenario? So you can just have a look at my portfolio in more context.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful for us to have another discussion around the working arrangements and how it would practically work? So we both feel good going into this process. Yeah. So
Got it.
again, it's like a super open, light, helpful way of positioning. Is there anything we've missed? Because, like, I want to make sure I've really sold the
Yeah.
opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. You brought up in my head a nightmare that I've experienced a few times. In the middle of an interview, someone says, I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I could show you. And you just go, no, please don't do that. Because no, like, I don't want to sit here for 20 minutes watching slides that mean nothing to me. So do not do that in the interview, but definitely provide it
Yes.
as backup data.
Yeah.
Cool.